today.
Wow.
I think flowers are really cool. I think they're so fun. They smell good. They look good. Sometimes they taste good. They turn into fruit sometimes. I think flowers are super cool. I might be the only one though. Something tells me I'm not, because they sell things like flower leggings. But so I started this lesson thinking about how much I love flowers. I was like, oh, I want to teach everybody about flowers. Like, there's all this cool factoids in my head about how cool flowers are. And I started researching pollination because that seemed like a good entry point, a good way to sort of connect this idea of pollination to the idea of community and or the idea of flowers to our community and how they're all so deeply intertwined. And then I was doing some more research about flowers because I didn't actually know very much about pollination. And I was like, well, I have 2 weeks to write this lesson and I don't really know anything. And I was doing this research about starting with flower anatomy. And the flowers are sort of divided into the male parts and the female parts. And that really got me curious. And so I want to prompt you all with a journal prompt to begin with. Does everybody have a journal? If not, I have some extra paper and some pens, if need be. Or if you just want a different color to pizzazz it up.
So we're doing pollination or flowers?
Yes.
Yes. We're doing a lot of things, because everything's connected. Can you have one without the other?
No.
Precisely. Prompts I have for you today are, what role does gender play in your life, your community, and or your understanding of the world? If you want me to repeat these at any point, please let me know.
And you want gender is your word there?
Gender is my word there. And if we want to get into a discussion about sex and gender, I'm more than happy to do so. And why does it matter how scientists talk about gender and or sex? And you can write, you can draw, however you feel like you want to express your thoughts on this. Talk to a neighbor or talk as a larger community? If you want to share.
Neighbors.
Neighbors are good? Okay. Want to maybe pair up in twos or small clumps? You want to talk about what came up in this journal prompt?
I know.
Yes. Would you like to talk about it?
Did you get the chance to write on both?
Sure. I do. How it affects. Well, I guess
Okay, what do you have for us?
in a sense of gender,
I was thinking about
it's kind of because it really affects our society as a whole, and that it used to be so divided, and now people are getting used to the concept that, you know, it doesn't really set us apart as much as we'd like to think, and that we're all very some people vary, there's various mentalities about it.
as a child who I was
All of it is just a different reality of each one of us, and how we perceive each one of these genders depends on how we're different. It's personality. It's really how we raise our children. What do you think?
I think gender sadly changes how we're treated and how and how just everything about us, like how we're
Do you think?
treated, what we wear, everything.
What we're allowed to wear.
Yeah, because there's like this stereotypical. There's woman goes to and stays at home, takes care of the kids, cooking, cleaning, blah blah blah, that stuff.
Yeah, and the apron and the
Yeah, and then the man goes out, does all the hard work, and then expects the second he gets home, then he's expecting dinner to be at the table, everyone to be there, and then he also, depending on if he drinks alcohol, then if he
Cool. Just another minute and
false
reconvene.
expectations.
Yeah.
And feeling like you have to fit into society's mold.
yeah, gender stereotypes.
Yeah. And the thing is that when people tell you to be yourself and not let that define you, or don't let it get to your head or anything like that, it's just, well, where do we start?
Yeah.
Because as a society have depended so long on it that this generation, I feel, is mainly making a break in this mentality.
Yeah.
And with all this new ways of dealing with it and approaching gender and such like that, it's just a really new concept to a lot of people, especially old people.
Yeah,
Like,
because
I would never let my son wear that, or my
Yeah.
boy.
my boy will be in the military and he can't go to cooking school or art school or
My
whatever.
girl is not gonna wear that sweatshirt. Your hair short, you look like a boy.
Yeah, you're not doing that when in reality it doesn't really matter. It just depends on
Invite
Your
everyone
personal
back
opinion.
to our
It
circle.
does. It's just hard to do what you want.
I hope I'm not cutting anyone off. Sorry if I am. This is a very large discussion.
That's my answer to the first question.
This is a
This is a
very-
big question.
This is a big question and a big topic. In my last version of this lesson, it was hodgepodged all different, but some feed forward was framing it this way. So I want to think about this idea of gender and sex in the context of flowers, because that's where my whole lesson started, was this idea of flowers. And I got so sidetracked with this huge idea of like, what is gender and how does it impact, how is it in science, and how do we talk about it as communities, and how do we understand the world, and maybe why do we put things on a binary, and how is that helpful, how is that hurtful, and all of these huge ideas. But I want to bring us back to where we are here on Sucia, and back to the flowers. And right here, I have one camas that I was given permission to pick, and this is the only one that we're going to pick today. And if y'all could maybe I'll pass it around, and we could look, I want to take just a few minutes to look at the anatomy of the flower. And we're going to do a little flower anatomy lesson in the foundation of our dominant Western science, is the context of that. So what, are y'all familiar with flower anatomy at all? Like a little bit? A little bit? What do y'all know about flower parts? Yeah.
I know that flowers typically don't have one specific gender.
Okay.
Thank you, biology. I appreciate
Upside down writing. Part of the technique for learning how to be an outdoor educator is upside down writing.
I actually practice upside down writing
There you go.
regularly. It's good for my brain, I think.
Naomi was just doing it as well.
Really? That's sick. Anybody else, maybe if you've already gotten a chance to look at the commas, what did you notice in it, or on it, or
Many veins.
veins?
Veins,
Yeah.
colors.
Did you say veins and colors?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any idea why flowers are so colorful?
To attract bees so then they get pollinated.
Totally. Totally. It's actually pretty cool because bees have, I think it's ultraviolet vision. And so when they look at a flower, they don't see the same colors that we do, but instead there's actually patterns in the petals that direct them towards the center where the pollen is. So it looks sort of like a runway. You can look it up on the internet when you get home. And it's really cool. There's like they have all these really complicated patterns that direct bees or other pollinators towards the pollen, which is really cool. What else? Totally. Ding, 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 ding. Chloe's got it. So
Can you repeat that louder?
Chloe said that there's a lot of pieces sticking out with little doodads on the top, and then there's a bigger one in the middle that doesn't have that, which is exactly where we're going with this. So in a flower, and feel free to draw along if you want to have this for later referencing. So we start, and we often think the first thing is the petals. So here's my big ambiguous flower with its petals. 26. And then, as Chloe's pointing out, there's the little bits with the doodads on them. So they sort of come out all around the sides. And these are the male parts of the flower. So what we have here are the stamen, is the long bit. Stamen, which I remembered. So I did a lot of like ways to remember all these parts because I'm just learning them, and they're largely appropriate but not entirely. But I think of the stamen sounds a lot like semen, which is in humans the male anatomy reproductive part, and on top is the anther, which I remembered as like an antler, but Rob said that men always have the anther, and that's how he remembered it. They always think they have the anther,
Lift the anther.
which I thought was pretty funny. So these are the male parts. You have the stamen and the anther, and then in the middle you have the female part, which as collectively is called the style. At the bottom is the ovule. I don't know what an ovule is. Similar. Exactly. This is basically the ovary of the flower. And then out of that comes a filament, which is called, what is it? The pistil, because women are pistils. And then on top of that is the stigma, because sometimes there's a stigma about female sexuality. This is how I remembered them. And it's actually pretty cool because they're designed so that when a pollinator comes in, so, okay, taking a step back, this would be an example of a monoecious flower, which means that it has both male and female parts. Not all flowers are monoecious. Not all plants are monoecious. There are some things that are called dioecious. So an example of a dioecious plant is something that has female reproductive parts on one plant and male reproductive parts on the other. An example of that, yes. Yes. Ding, ding, ding. Another example is juniper, who we have right here next to us. There are two large junipers here, and one of them is a male juniper, and one of them would be a female juniper. And you might notice some differences between them and some similarities. We're going to have some time to explore in a minute, so I want to encourage you all to check it out. I don't think the flowers are visible right now on the flowering organism, which I believe is the male. They're actually up at the top. And does anybody know why they might be up at the top? Totally. Anything else?
Sun.
Yeah? Other reasons?
Because men are at the top.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. Perhaps.
When you're going down this
Makes
Yeah.
stereotypical level.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of it as sort of dispersal and pollination. And I guess you point out a really good thing, Nick, is that these are sort of really oversimplifying things. And this is how I remember it, and it is really largely based on how I've moved through the world in my life and the way that the world has been presented to me. And a lot of that is these really intense binaries. And I want to encourage you all to think about the fact that it's much more complicated than that in a lot of situations. So now that we're... Oh, what else goes on in a flower? Do they float in space? Yes. What about what you just learned about?
Roots.
Yes. They have big roots. I did a little bit of research on how some plants are monocots and some are dicots. Did you all learn about that?
A little bit.
What do you know about monocots and dicots?
The mono has one and it like goes down all like just like whoosh-cha.
Yeah,
Straight
like a
down and
deep
then-
taproot, like a dandelion maybe.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's the dicot, no? Dicots are the taproot. Oh, you got one. So then the other one is what you said,
Yeah.
which is the monocot.
The monocot. So the monocot is like, and the dicot's like that. And I think there is a correlation between the type of flowers that are produced and the root system. To be perfectly honest, I'm not very familiar with that right now. It's something worth exploring in the future. Or maybe we have some resources here on the island with us that we could check out, if that's something anybody's interested in. But I want to give you all a chance to get acquainted with the flowers here on Sucia and look at some different flowering plants that are here. We have the camas that we've identified. There's one going around somewhere. And actually earlier there was an ant on it, which was really cool, and watching the ant get the pollen. But there's also some other organisms around that are flowering. There's some flowering grasses, there's some mosses, there's a lovely bush. There is a few really little teeny tiny flowers. So I want to give you all a chance to get up, move around, explore. And before we do that, I want to invite you all to think about this idea of sustainable harvesting. And today we're not actually going to be harvesting at all because we're here, we're visitors, and this is a relatively sensitive ecosystem. But the idea that when we're potentially taking an organism or looking to gain something or take something, that we want to give an offering. We want to be really mindful about how we're taking and how we're approaching these things. And it's a lot like petting a dog. You don't just walk up to a dog and pet it. You want to ask the owner, but you also want to look at the dog. And maybe the dog is a little standoffish, its ears are back, and you wouldn't want to touch that dog. And it's a lot like that with plants. If there's just one plant, you would want to leave it alone. If there's maybe a pollinator on it, you wouldn't want to interrupt that interaction that's going on there. It's just sort of an idea to put in the back pocket of your brain for the rest of your life. But I want to give you all a chance. We have a few hand lenses, I believe. There's a field guide if anybody wants to look at that. I want to give you all some time to just look around and explore and notice the anatomy of the plants. You might want to check out the juniper berries and smell them. They smell pretty cool. Just go around. Our boundaries are going to be no farther than those 2 trees on the trail, remaining on top of this area, and then no farther than the 2 trees right here. And be really mindful if you decide to explore into the camas patch, just watching where you're stepping, trying not to sit on anything or trample anything. But be free, enjoy. And I want to, sorry, but there's this idea of, I know this, I wonder it reminds me of, I think Naomi might have done a version of that, but I want to encourage you to think about that while you're looking at these flowers. What do you notice? What does it remind you of? What are you wondering? Okay, actually, for real now. Go be free. And then there are non-hermaphroditic but monoecious flowers that cannot. And I would like to be totally honest, I have only know what I learned in the last 2 weeks about this, and like maybe in bio in high school.
Back in the day.
But I think a lot of flowers won't pollinate themselves right off the bat, and they're actually, a lot of them are different heights, so that's a lot less likely. As the bee is getting nectar, the pollen won't automatically transfer.
So for most flowers, it would be the pollinator would get stuck in this and would go to another plant
Yes.
entirely and would do the same, and then some of that pollen would transfer over.
Yeah, and my understanding is that the stigma actually filters pollen, so it will only allow...
Take from another plant.
Yes, and it will only allow the pollen that it's compatible with to go down.
Strawberries.
Strawberries?
Yeah,
there's
wild
strawberries in
strawberries.
there.
Really?
Flowering too.
Oh.
I have
And then
more
actu-
questions.
Oh wow, it's wilting, it's dehydrated,
Yeah.
just like me. And so my understanding is that some flowers will not pollinate themselves right off the bat unless no pollinators have come, and then at the end when they close up, towards the end of the season, they will pollinate themselves. That's sort of like a
It's the
backup
last
mechanism.
effort.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
which is really cool.
Yeah. And once it is pollinated, most of the time that flower will close up on itself, correct? Like it's kind of done its job.
Yeah. And actually, like in a strawberry, if you look at it, the the petals will fall off, and then the middle of the flower turns into the berry, and sort of the outside turns into leaves. You probably knew that already. But that's how, as the fruit grows, the petals are no longer needed. You're just doing this all to help me understand it better.
No,
Oh, wow.
I'm asking
Well, thank
real
you.
questions for
This is very
real
helpful for me,
understanding.
too.
Yeah. No, I try not to ask questions that I know the answer to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wait, Rose. No, go away. I'm allergic to these.
And then this one, and I liked it because it was purple. But it
Yeah,
looks
I think
like
that's a kind of grass. It looks like weeds, don't you say?
wheat. No, wheat.
Wheat. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no. Nope.
Which one is the dove purple?
The dove foot geranium, I believe is this one.
Mediterranean. Oh, the little pink flowers.
Yeah.
I thought that it was nice. And I really like these little baby ones.
Yeah, I wonder what those are. They
I
look
would
like,
assume that all the flowers.
They look like
what a picture of forget-me-not.
forget-me-nots or...
That's actually Fred.
No, my mom has forget-me-nots on her leg as a
Could it be an
tattoo.
aspen?
The
They're orange.
Likely, I mean,
state flower of Alaska.
tiny
Actually, they
little
might be
petals.
forget-me-nots. I'm not
I wonder, so, hand lens. Can you see their bits? Here you go.
No, I have no idea.
Maybe that's your
My
eye.
plant game on the bank is very low.
I should have brought my...
Like I was really good around my house growing up. I could identify. Yes. And I studied those things. And my parents are
pollen bit, so...
into that thing.
There's the pollen bit?
Well, the pollen's in here.
What did you find?
It smells very toasty around here.
It's like different shape than this one.
Cool. I wonder, yeah. I wonder if the monasteries are dying.
Where did you find this dove?
I almost don't see the stamen anthers that are in that one. That doesn't mean it's not there. It might just look different. Perhaps. Like I said, I really don't. I'm not an expert on this at all. Wow, this one is really cool. This one is so cool. Do you want to check this one out? You don't have to, but no. Okay. Wow, that's really cool. It's like a big cup. And then inside is like all the stuff. Here, you hold it so that you can get the light right.
Would you say grasses have flowers?
Yeah, they do flower.
They do.
They do.
wow.
I don't know if they're monoecious or dioecious though. Actually, I wonder if there's a correlation between monocots and dicots
This
and
one
monoecious
flowered.
versus dioecious.
You suggested there might be earlier.
So you
Yeah,
call that
that's a good-
flowering?
Yeah, that's what Nick said.
Well, these ones don't always look like this. They open up and they turn purple.
But they go by wind rather than insects more often, yes?
Yes, that's my understanding.
That's why they grow so well, don't
Yeah,
they?
it's fine.
Thank you.
I think that's a fescue. Fescue tend to have
She's beautiful.
all of their seeds at the top.
I don't know. Wait, is it a boy or a girl?
The graminoid grasses, so
Both?
they're both.
They're beautiful.
On the same plant?
Same flower or same plant?
Same
Because some
same
have
plant,
like
same flower. There's not.
Okay.
It's not like a Douglas fir or a true fir that has cones that separated in the tree.
Depending on how high it is,
Yeah, usually it's by height.
where the
So males are typically
pollen's
at the top.
above, hoping for gravity and wind.
This one I think is
Yeah,
the,
and then the female
ghost
cones are
one.
lower.
because I think
Do they also have different orientation as
Yeah,
to how they
yeah,
sit?
yeah. Males tend to go up.
you said what?
Not always,
this
but males
one's
tend to
like
go up.
the-
And so, like,
That seems
good, another good
Yeah.
example of this is
Yeah,
alder
like
and,
in some of the signs it's called like hermaphroditic,
and maples.
'cause
So
they can
maples,
self-pollinate,
They have catkins,
which is why
which
we
these
don't
male
use that term
cones
for
at the
humans
angle,
anymore, 'cause we
and then
can't self-pollinate
the
stuff.
female
Among
cones
other
are
political
not cones, they're flowers.
but
So they're,
Under 6 is a
I mean, a cone is
Yeah,
a flower.
yeah. I'd say which,
the
and I think
female
largely,
are flowers,
like,
and they're just,
scientifically,
like,
the reason is
ready to
the
go.
pollination.
Like
Then there's
flowers as we
no,
think
Like
but
of
there's
that.
no
So like it doesn't even apply.
stamen.
And actually, yeah, I was saying, I
Stamen
thought about
right
talking
there,
about
'cause they're up
sex
in
and how
these
that's
catkin
1% of our
things, so
population.
they're
Which
waiting
is so
for-
many people,
Yeah.
and how it's
And usually
so
it's
rarely talked
across
about.
rather
Yeah.
than down.
Which is
I was
really
watching
But
a
not
documentary
always. I mean,
about it the other day.
they can actually, they can
Well,
And they
like
can
that during the
self-pollinate. Yeah.
a lot of the time.
Is that bad for their gene pool?
Like usually you can't even.
No. What does bad mean?
Yeah, I was saying usually. You can
Well,
tell.
so we think about
even if you can.
Higher
it's none of your
diversity?
business anyway.
yes.
Yeah, but we're talking about
Truly.
millions, trillions of pollen
Oh, I have
being sent around in a little
Marco
forest.
and
And so the likelihood of them only self-pollinating is really low.
Thomas's
Okay.
Yeah.
stuff.
Huh.
Secret stalkers.
And also, I mean, genetically.
Limited. I understand
we
that.
have a-
stigma.
There's a
We
around
have
it.
a very focused view of what that means in a human sense, right?
Yeah. The stamen kind of out and above. I don't know if it was just it was fresh. So on this particular flower, because there's like one flower, it looked like they were all of the pollen in there, but I didn't see anything higher than in the middle. Is it down deeper?
There it is.
Oh, this is.
Down, down.
So that's what turns into the fruit.
Mm-hmm. That's the ovatum.
And the
Are those different words?
No, and there's lots of them, right? So that little thing.
Which is why all the little bears
See,
do
it
the little
looks like
thing.
a tiny, tiny fairy. It's a aggregate of drupelets. So that's what the name of this fruit is. Do you see all those little tiny
Would you guys
tops?
like a
Those are all the
lens?
female bits.
yeah.
Oh, look at that technology.
physics. I have to get it good for something.
So those all get
All get pollinated,
Pollinated, and then
individually,
they
and
go-
that's why they have those weird little spots where they.
some
are
of
like,
the
And that's
some of the
because they never got
drupelets.
pollinated.
Yeah, you got some
Oh,
of the
that's like
drupelets.
corn kernels, right?
And the
Yeah.
point of storing the sugars in the fruit is really just to provide nutrients for the seeds once they
yeah, when they drop.
once they drop.
Yeah. And this, I think, is the hybrid between trailing blackberry and Himalayan blackberry.
There's a hybrid?
This one here.
Yeah, because it has
So it's not
really
invasive, but
purple
it's not
stems,
native.
and it's trying to figure out if it can do a 5 petal.
Does that make it native if it
Yeah, well, I mean, what is native?
oh yeah, I guess. Did it evolve here? Do you know?
I don't know about here on Sucia, but
Yeah, I was say here where. Yeah, you're right. It's all just a bunch of hodgepodgeness.
yeah. What is space? What is time, really, though?
Oh man, we got really into that in my last class last quarter, and
What
just
is
like
space and
threw
time?
the idea of time out the window,
Yeah.
which is
That's
fun.
one of my favorite.
You found it.
lessons to give.
What family?
Field chickweed.
Oh, chickweed. Yeah, you got it. I could have thought about chickweed, but usually I think chickweed is smaller. Good one. Cool.
And water algae.
Oh, cool.
It's soft.
Cool.
Oh my gosh.
Anybody else? Observations or thoughts or questions maybe that came out of this? I know that when I was doing this project, I just had, for every, I don't even think I ever found any facts, but for every like piece nugget of information I found, I had 100 questions around it, which was fun and overwhelming and cool and exciting and launched me off into this big spiral of exploring. Yeah. Anything anybody wants to share?
Flowers are cool.
Plants are cool.
Cool things are cool. Life is cool.
Yeah. So I want to bring us back to this idea of gender and how in plants there are so many different ways of reproducing and how each one plays an essential role in the functioning of the ecosystem. There are some plants that attract some pollinators and other plants that pollinate themselves. And the ones that attract pollinators, perhaps the pollinator attracts a predator and then the predator has poop and then the poop fertilizes the other plant. And everything is all reliant on each other, which is really cool. Precisely. And this world is so complex. And it's really, I think, sort of, Mackenzie, I think I overheard you asking, like, why do we gender things? Why do we assign sexes to things? And I think that sort of what I'm coming to think is a lot of it is just trying to understand. And I think that the Western science that's dominant puts things in a dichotomy because it's a lot easier to process things that way, of like, it's this or it's that, it's safe or it's unsafe, it's familiar or it's new, and it's a way of understanding, but it really does limit things sometimes. It can be useful at times, but it can also really limit things. And I want to encourage you all to think about how complicated things are and how things often don't fit into the boxes that we try and put them in. And that the diversity in the community leads to strength and resilience. We couldn't have a population of all one organisms that would thrive. Like, each of us is incredibly dependent on the other. The juniper and the camas live together intentionally, along with all of these grasses and the water algae and the ducks and the seals and the seagulls. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Yeah.
We should be more like the flowers.
What do you mean by that?
We should stop worrying about why this is this or this is that and just kind of roll with it, because people are different and everything is different. And there's no one individual or plant or anything that's the same. And so we should kind of just roll with the punches instead of being mean to people because of how they feel.
And we all like rely on each other for something.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, if everybody was the same, you wouldn't be able to survive.
If every pork chop were perfect, we wouldn't have hot dogs.
I like that. Cool. Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that some of the problematic understanding or problematic ways of identifying things comes out of just trying to understand. And that we often make mistakes when we're trying to understand things. And that's okay, and it's just to be compassionate to folks who have different ideas and to come together and converse about maybe why we think something else, and to really listen to why other people do things differently than us. And I think this leads back to this idea of how we speak and the words we use. And the words that we use has a much, much more profound impact and ripples so much farther than we often recognize. Whether it's the anatomy of how we identify plants, or how we speak to ourselves, or how we speak to our community members. This is all so much bigger. Like, this lesson started with pollination and it got so much bigger the more I looked at it. It got me really excited and really overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. And it just I just wanted to encourage you all, I don't know anything about anything, but I know something about something sometimes, and I know a little about a lot, or a lot about a little. And just keep questioning what you know, because sometimes you think you know something and then you find out you were totally wrong. When we were here on Sucia last time, somebody gave a lesson about junipers that turned into this whole idea of how science is in flux and how we understand things changes over time. And that's so important to remember, even when we really think we got it right, just to remember to have humility and to be, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I don't know. And just keep questioning. Question the inherency, question the facts, question everything.
Yes.
Be Socrates.
Yeah. And just keep exploring.
Socrates.
Does anybody have any questions? Thoughts?
No, okay.
No questions.
Can you be my new health teacher?
Yeah, are you hiring?
Yes.
Personally.
I'll give you $1.
Okay.
I'll give you $1.
I mean, I can be a what's the word? Mentor? Health mentor?
Yes.
I could do that.
That sounds good.
Can I ask a question of the group?
Yeah.
It feels like right now we're starting to look at changing language around some particular things, which happens all the time. Some language that I ran into in San Francisco that isn't catching up in this area and may not catch on. We're dealing with gender and Z and Zer, so we're changing pronouns to be genderless pronouns. And then I was thinking about science and teaching science as to whether or not we could change and have another name for male, female. I mean, we ascribe male and female, but whether or not that would help it at all. We often change pronouns or we change words, and then those become stigmatized really quickly. So the question is there a benefit to changing language? Can we get away from stigma by changing our words?
Just a question.
That's a question that I want to know. What do you think?
I think that you should just let people identify however they want. And if we weren't so concerned about, like, I guess pronouns, like, because some people really care about the way that people see them, and like other people really don't. But I think, well, for me anyway, the way that I try to go about it is that I just never assume how somebody identifies themselves. And so until I've asked someone, like, what are your pronouns? How do you prefer to identify yourself? How do you see yourself? And how do you want people to talk to you? Like, how do you want people to refer to you as? I would just use a gender neutral pronoun, like they, them, because I know for me and for a lot of my friends, like, being misinterpreted, like misgendered, it's something that they kind of get used to, and me too, but it doesn't feel good. It's like almost like self-deprecating. Like, and if somebody misgenders you, I guess depending on the person, but most of the people that I know that struggle with identity issues based on gender, like, it can be really harmful to their mental health to constantly be called something that they don't identify with.
What of the things though that are different when it comes to the sexes? So there are some biological things that make us different. The question there might be changing the language with those so that they don't mix with gender, and whether or not that's beneficial.
I feel like modern science should just like identify the fact that there's a difference between gender and sex. Like, everybody has a different sex.
So it needs to be said more.
But gender and sex are not always one and the same.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So Robin Wall Kimmerer has gifted us a set of pronouns when working with other than human creatures.
Huh.
And Robin Wall Kimmerer is a
Potawatomi?
Potawatomi, indigenous ethno-ecologist person, and just really an incredible writer. She wrote a book called Gathering Moss, and another one called Braiding Sweet Deer Grass, if you're interested in
I
what
have
I was about to say.
both back at camp.
And we have them here, apparently. So she has a whole chapter on gendering, say, this surf scoter down here. So look down here with this little orange-billed surf scoter. In our world, in the Western world, we refer to these things as its often, or I think often worse, we usually refer to them as he. We go to the male pronoun as our default. So what is he doing? Even in just idle conversation, do you see that or it? Do you see, what do you think he's doing right now? It's diving right now, or she's, they are diving right now. So she got all muddled around that. It's like, I hate this conundrum that shows up. And she decided to do a little etymology and found in the end that a term that comes from Japanese actually is ki, and also links in with our Latin system to kin, and starts referring to all other than human species as ki and kin, and not in a gendered way, as so kin surf scoter. Kin surf scoter here is diving. What is kin doing? Diving. What is kin doing? And the idea of kin being of our relation, to see it in personhood, right? And to extend this idea of personhood way into the other than human space. And it's very hard. I've tried it. It's really hard to integrate into our language because gender is so built into our cultural systems.
Where does ki come into that? How would you use ki?
Ki is, I think that was just her etymology, so she built it into kin. Kin being the singular. Ki might be the plural. Yeah. Yeah.
This world is so complex.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a really good chapter, and it sort of helps walk through the idea of pronouns in other than human species.
Robin Wall Kimmerer
I second that.
She's worth a read.
It's worth checking out. And I just want to say, we are all like this commas, all wilty right now, and probably mega dehydrated. I would encourage everybody to drink some water. Because I'm probably like this right now.
Eat some salt.
Eat some salt.
Which I knew I already did.
Ah! You foiled me again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yay!
Thanks, everyone.
That was cool.
Thanks. I was absolutely terrified. I was working on this lesson with all of my fellow students and had this moment of just like, what in the actual hickety heck am I about to do? This is off the deep end.
I've never had like a formal, I technically see this as formal because it's a school program. A formal like lesson about like gender identity like that. I know it was about plants, but it was also it was a both kind of thing, and I think that for me it was really gratifying to just see that and be able to identify with something like that.
Yeah,
That's never happened before.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did anybody actually smell a juniper berry?
Jeez.
Because you should.
So you should.
Their taste is a little better.
One of the best gifts of plants is how so good they smell.
And taste.
And taste.
Ooh,
They smell so good.
that's like
Oh, and they're
citrusy.
beautiful.
Yeah, they're really
What's
citrusy.
not to love?
Can I eat it?